Hey everyone, I'm Jay.
And I'm Sean.
Yeah. Documentary called Disclosure. So it is about transgendered actors and transgendered portrayals in Hollywood. So we're looking at specifically how over time, and really going back to
the beginning of film.
That's right. Up until today, what those roles have looked like, if they've been there, and why are they there. And then, more from today's perspective, what is the difference between an actor pretending, playing dress up to do it, and an actual transgendered actor filling that role? So I actually thought this was a really interesting and informative documentary. I thought it was really well put together.
I agree. It was really, as you said, it's put together well, and the cases that they use to show this are very illustrative. That this is what they're describing is happening, and the people don't even necessarily agree as to whether that's good or bad sometimes, and that's in there as well. That this is, people discussing these issues of what is important, what is bad, what is harmful, what can be helpful, even if it's not correct.
Yeah. So their sources were numerous and varied. So we have heard from actors themselves, but also researchers, historians, activists, all kinds of people. So I really did enjoy that we were hearing from so many different sources. And like you said, even the research, all of this is so new that we don't have a lot to guide us, and we're kind of stumbling along. And not everyone agrees, even within the transgendered community, and that's okay. I don't think that there was any big disagreements. And like you said, I think they've had to sort of content themselves with a less than ideal situation. And so with that lens, is there some good in there? Yeah, maybe there is, just in terms of visibility.
I think the visibility point was a really interesting one that I didn't really think of. But yes, to have a trans person in film, regardless of how that trans person is treated, just knowing that that exists really is clearly an important part of the process for someone who is a kid who does not really know what these feelings are, and then to see it on screen. And that was over and over in this movie, of people saying that's exactly what experience I had as a kid. That suddenly I fit, I make sense. And that in itself...
And this is a thing. Other people live this way.
Yeah.
It's not just me being... It is a real thing.
But then there's the other side of it where you say, yes, for example, Ace Ventura is really horrible toward a trans person in that movie. So it's not great that that portrayal exists, and yet it's probably better that it did exist than did not exist at all.
Right. And so many even people in the documentary say, I liked this movie as a kid. I realize now how problematic it is. And I think even in the context, we're discussing right now what statues to take down and what, historical records need to be changed, and should we teach Huckleberry Finn in school?
Yeah.
These are conversations that we need to have, and it's okay to have them. And certainly this stuff is problematic, but I think it serves a purpose if we are learning from it. It shows growth if we can look at a movie that we used to like and now we feel really kind of bad about those jokes. And, I think there is something to be said about that. And I think, was it Katie Couric?
I think it was.
Had an interview, I was it Candace Cayne? But anyway, she asked, it was certainly Laverne Cox and I think Candace Cayne were there, and felt very uncomfortable by some of the questions that Katie Couric was posing, which were sort of surgery or genital focused. And, you know, nobody wants to go on a talk
no one
show
else
to
is
talk
going to be
about
asked
that.
about that.
No, exactly. That's but you know, they sort of credited her with owning her mistake and learning from it. And I think that's kind of a positive way to spin these things, is that, you know, we don't have to cancel Katie Couric because she made a mistake. She has grown and learned from it, and so do we at home, right? Because we're all, to some degree, guilty of not being perfect, of not really knowing all of these things that we're still learning about. And so we have to feel like there's a little bit of room to make mistakes.
Yeah, well, I think we as a society are getting better. Mm-hmm. But this in particular is it's confusing for someone like me who was born in the right body. I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to as I go along. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we have discussions like this, the better. But yeah, I have certainly not gotten this perfect in the past. I know I look back at how my process has evolved, and it's good that it has. But as you said, like having that conversation, having documentaries like this out there for just more stuff to think about and try and put yourself in that other person's shoes. Mm-hmm. Be like, okay, yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm. And I think it is such a blessing to have a movie like this, where they're answering questions without us having to ask them. And because it is a burden for us to constantly be going to the minority group and being like, teach me how to be a nice person to you. It shouldn't be on them, it should be on us. So it's great when we have a resource like this that we can go to and learn a little bit from it. And I think the movie points out that more than 80% of us do not know, or we don't know that we know someone who is transgendered. That includes most transgendered people growing up. Until they start seeking out those specific communities, they may not know anyone either. So it's okay to get the stuff wrong, but I think it's important to try your best to educate yourself. I think this is not just a minority community, but a very vulnerable community.
Very, very vulnerable.
Yes. Subject
to a whole lot of violence being perpetrated on them because of who they are. Mm-hmm.
So they need a lot of support, and they need a lot of ally support because their numbers are too few to always advocate for themselves. And so I think part of being a good feminist for me is including all women, including transgendered women, and making sure we're all accounted for. I do believe that.
And also being a good person.
Absolutely. And I thought one interesting thing that the film kind of pointed out is that we, in media, we don't hear as much from transgendered men, in part because women are just consumables, right? We are a commodity, and so even a transgendered woman is going to be more filmed, photographed, stories made about her. And so that is, I think, a voice that we haven't heard a lot from, and so maybe we should be looking for more of those sources as well.
I think that is a really good point, and statistically this documentary did mention the numbers of trans women and trans men are pretty similar in the world.
Yeah.
So the media focus on only trans women is very skewed. Mm-hmm. It is not a reflection of our society as a whole.
Certainly not, that's right. And of course, their portrayal of them as sex workers who are murdered
is
also
unbelievable.
Skewed.
As you see it, you're like, yes, that is how every procedural cop show goes.
That is how this story has been told. Yeah. We are changing. Another thing I loved is we talked about the show Transparent, which obviously is a big moment. How a lot of, it's a crossover kind of show, right? It had a recognizable actor in the central role. Turns out, like so many of these leading men, he is a total friggin' creep.
Yeah.
And the documentary didn't really shy away from that.
No.
It was like, we're going to address it because it is a problem. And, you know, who is this person who, you know, nominates himself to take on this role and yet clearly does not believe in any sort of respect towards women?
Yep.
That's, you know, monumentally disappointing, and really, I think especially too bad for a show like this to have, you know, discredit poured upon them. It's kind of like the Cosby Show, which was like a big part of our youth.
Absolutely, yeah.
To be able to see a very
an affluent black family,
yes,
who is a family unit, because again, that's another thing we never see on TV.
But we didn't until we saw them.
Yeah.
And it was like a doctor and a lawyer, and they're a perfect little family, and we loved them.
Yeah.
We didn't really think much of it. And those were shows that helped, a crossover show, a prime time show, that helped us all get a little closer and a little more comfortable. And Transparent was that. And so it's really too bad when they then suffer.
Yeah. Because of the bad egg.
There's a lot of bad eggs out there, Sean, though, is the problem.
That is the problem. So it's hard for your show not to be affected, whatever it's about.
That's right. So I really enjoyed the documentary because there was a very wide variety of perspectives, a lot of familiar faces, but some new ones as well. And I think it's great to hear from so many different voices and to be reminded about, you know, to be queer and black and trans.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of othering.
Othering, yeah. It's a lot to have to live with. That's a lot of different intersectional sort of, I mean, you are still one person, so your needs are your needs. And I think we need to do a better job of remembering that there is a wide spectrum out there. So kudos to Netflix for putting that one up. It was a very good watch, an interesting watch, and I think part of an important conversation.
Agreed. Yeah, I think this is definitely one that, a documentary for people that like to think and discuss, and this is obviously an issue that we're discussing societally. For better or worse, it is a battleground issue. And I think this adds a lot to that conversation, that hopefully we can find that ground to say, this is okay. That this is a thing that we need to accept. Not tolerate, accept.
Well, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for being part of the conversation. And you can find this one on Netflix. It's called Disclosure. Bye.
Bye.